Tonight, as Matt said at the beginning of the night, we're starting a new series all about TNL. Who are we? This is our 31st year, and since we've moved here since about almost exactly 2 years ago, we are in a new phase where we're sort of a church plant again. A lot has changed in the circumstances of this church over 31 years. The location has changed many, many, many times. The demographic has changed. So it's a good time to revisit who we are. What do we care about? What are the values that define us as a unique expression of Christ's church? And I think it's important to talk about how well are we embodying these values. If we're living out the things that we together say are important to us as a community, then we should be known for these things out in the wider community beyond these four walls. You could say this is a series exploring what we think our reputation should be. Church reputation is a difficult thing in 2024. I think the perception of the church, institutions across the board, but certainly the church, is maybe at an all-time low. Barna in 2021 put out a survey in which they asked the question, which of the following best describes your view of local Christian churches in your city? And these are the non-Christian responses that I'm sharing with you. 45% of people said that the church is hypocritical. 59% said it is irrelevant. 51% said judgmental. And 44% said known for things they are against. Yikes. We have a lot of work to do. This is honestly really sad to me, especially that we're known for the things we're against, not the things that we're for. I think this is backwards. This is so backwards from what our reputation should be. Our reputation should be like the person who we claim to follow. We should have a reputation like Jesus, or at least one that's a lot closer than what it is now. And that's the reputation that we're going to be talking about tonight. To do so, we're going to be looking at a story found in Luke chapter 7, starting around verse 36, but it will be up on the screens if you want to follow along. It starts out, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. The Pharisees were the religious leaders, kind of the religious elite at this time. So this is kind of a big deal that Jesus is being invited to this man's house. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. That word in this story used for woman and in the conjunction with the description that is given about her almost certainly means to imply that she is a prostitute. And she somehow has made her way into this religious leader's home. She crashes the party, so to speak. She's bawling so much that she is soaking Jesus' feet in tears. I don't know if you've ever cried before. That's a lot of tears. And she's wiping her tears away from Jesus' feet, which is just sort of like an odd scene to contemplate and think about. It's such an odd scene that I think it's easy for us to remove ourselves from it and not really understand it. So I want to paint a more modern picture for you to imagine yourself in tonight. So on Saturdays, which is the Jewish day of worship, after synagogue, after their worship service, religious leaders like this Pharisee would often invite people to their home for lunch afterwards. That's an easy parallel for us to draw, right? We're at our worship service right now. A group of us, led by Matt Wilcox, go to Two Penguins, which is right down the road, for food and drinks after T&L each week. Imagine you're a part of that group. And on the short drive over there, you notice a woman standing on the corner of the street. Perhaps she's dressed in a way that makes it clear that she's not there just out for a stroll. She's out for other reasons. And you don't even think twice about it, right? You just pull into the parking lot, and you go inside. You sit at your table with a group of TNL people, and imagine a while after you're seated, you're talking, you're having a good time, in walks this woman. And and she comes straight to your table, and she's sobbing. And she just stands right behind Matt and starts giving him a shoulder rub. That's how awkward this situation would be. You would have some questions. Like, what is going on here? Does Matt know her? Does she know anyone at this table? What is going on? Now, don't get hung up on Matt being in the position of Jesus in the story. I'm not saying Matt is Jesus. Don't worry, Matt. No pressure. I'm trying to convey that the level of awkwardness that would be happening here. Except it's even more awkward because this isn't happening at a restaurant. This is happening in someone's house. This is the scene. What in the world is Jesus going to do in this situation? A sex worker just walked in and is clinging to Jesus' feet while he's reclining at the table of this religious elite leader. Picking back up, when the Pharisee who had invited him in saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus, hearing his thoughts, says, hey man, I can hear what you're saying. He says, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii. A denarii is about a day's wage. So that's like almost 2 years. And the other 50 denarii. Neither of them had the money to pay him back. So he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, Simon is the name of the Pharisee, do you see this woman? I came into your house, and you did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Jesus is such a compelling person. He has absolutely no problem, feels zero awkwardness hanging out with this woman with a terrible reputation. And at the same time, he also has no problem hanging out with this guy who has a problem with this woman's reputation and being associated with her. Which I think gives Jesus a pretty interesting reputation, right? And now the easy thing to do would be to read this story and say, don't be like the Pharisee. Be like Jesus. Accept people. But that's not the point of this story. Jesus tells a very particular little parable in this story that we just read. Let's just talk about it real quick. He says, 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed about 2 years' wages. The other owed about 2 months' wages. Neither had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. He forgave the debts of both. The moneylender is willing to forgive the woman who lived a sinful life, and the moneylender is willing to forgive the man whose lived a seemingly upright life, but who looks down on and judges and condemns anyone who hasn't. Both sin. Both are forgiven. Jesus doesn't write either one of them off. He doesn't cut either one of them out of what he's up to. So the point of the story is sort of like, be like both of these people. Be people who are forgiven. So many of us today cut people out of our lives that we don't agree with, right? It's our culture is so divided, maybe more than it ever has before. Plenty of people self-righteously want to write off people whose lifestyles they disagree with. It's so easy to just separate yourself from people who you deem live a sinful life and just cut them out. But we also have plenty of other people who also want to cut out and condemn anyone that they deem to be intolerant. Because why in the world would you ever want to associate with someone who's a racist or a bigot or a homophobe or whatever the most harsh thing you could say about someone is in our current culture? Why would you ever give someone the time of day if they're intolerant? Cut those people out of your life. But Jesus doesn't cut people out. He accepts people exactly where they are. He's willing to accept this woman who's led a sinful life. And he's willing to accept this man who completely judges this woman and is intolerant of her based on her background. He doesn't require either of them to get themselves together first, right? He doesn't require this woman to get her life together before he'll engage with her. He doesn't say, hey, go clean up your life and then come back and talk to me. He says, your sins are forgiven. Go in peace. He doesn't require this man to stop being judgmental before he'll dine with him. Jesus readily accepts the invitation and readily forgives him as well. Both of these people are accepted. Both of them meet Jesus there in the same place. No one is beyond God's love. No one has to earn God's love before he's willing to accept them. He accepts us just as we are. And we want to be like Jesus. So that's why we say every week, you're accepted here just as you are. We've said it every Tuesday for the last 31 years. And over that time, we've had people who have spent time in jail. You're accepted here just as you are. We've had people with histories of sexual brokenness. You're accepted here just as you are. There are people who have abused and struggled with drugs and alcohol and addiction. You're accepted here just as you are. There are people who come from broken homes. And you're accepted here just as you are. There are people who have struggled with serious mental conditions. You're accepted here just as you are. People who've struggled with homelessness, you're accepted here just as you are. People with racist histories, you're accepted here just as you are. People who are liberals, you're accepted here just as you are. People who are conservatives, you're accepted here just as you are. People who don't know what they are, you're also accepted here just as you are. People who like Coldplay. Just kidding. That's too far. And then there are people who, like me, grew up judging all of the above before becoming lost in some of these things myself. And even I'm accepted here just as I am. We certainly don't have it down perfectly, but we are trying to follow the model of Jesus to the best of our ability. And when we say, you're accepted here just as you are every Tuesday night, we really mean it. Whether you're recovering from life of obvious sin or you're recovering from judging and condemning others, you are accepted here just as you are. We don't kick out people who have messed up lives. We don't kick out people who judge people who have messed up lives. In the entire time I've been here, I've only ever asked one person to stop coming, and it was temporary, and it was a very extreme thing. And even they were accepted just as they are when they were able to be safe here again. And along the way, we were helping them get to that place. We don't kick people out. You're accepted here just as you are. Now, this doesn't mean that we pretend sin isn't sin. This doesn't mean that we don't hold each other accountable for the things that we do and say and the ways that we say we're trying to grow more and more into the people God created us to be. But when that's done in a atmosphere and an environment and a relationship built on acceptance and grace and love, man, that makes all the difference in the world. Tiana is a place where everyone can come and meet Jesus. That's been true for me in every phase of my life. When I showed up in high school and was just here because my parents would let me go to a church, and it was also a place where I could meet girls, I was accepted here just as I was. Later, when I showed back up, riddled with depression and dying from an addiction, figuratively dying from an addiction, I was accepted here just as I was. I've worked at churches. I've grown up at churches. Early on at my time at TNL, when I started playing in the band, which had been a dream of mine at most of my life up to that point, I entered addiction recovery, and I knew that I had to tell the guys what was going on in my life. I'd hid it from everyone up to that point. And because I'd been around church long enough and had worked at churches, I knew what that meant. I knew that that meant I was going to be asked to stop. And so when I met with the worship pastor and the guy running the band and told them what was going on, I was fully expecting to be kicked out. And instead they said, "We're so glad you're here. And we're so sorry that you're dealing with this, and we're here for you." I was accepted just as I was. And even now, when I show up every week on the top of my game or at the bottom, when I'm killing it as a parent or when I'm struggling to just make it through the day, when I'm following Jesus or when I'm turned the other way, I'm accepted here just as I am. And if that's true for me, it's true for you. TNL is a place where everyone can come and meet Jesus. And as we grow and become more diverse, that will remain true. In some ways, that makes things more difficult, right? There's more tension when we're forced to be around people that we don't completely agree with on everything. But that's kind of what church should be. There should be these fundamental things that unite us, and the other things don't matter nearly as much. It stretches us in ways that we wouldn't be stretched if we decided to only include people who think or act or talk or are at the same life stage as us. But again, we think this is how the church should be. A place that reflects the radical acceptance of Jesus. A place where everyone is accepted just as they are. Will you pray with me? God, thank you for this community that has showed me so much grace in my life. Especially in times when nowhere else did. God, I pray that we would continue to be a place that reflected your radical grace and love for us. A place where people from all walks of life and every background can come and meet you and can come be a part of a community that cares about them. God, in our culture that is increasingly divided over anything, I pray that we would be a rare glimpse of what it looks like when people put aside their disagreements and their differences and come together to make the world a better place. God, may we be people who steward this amazing opportunity to continue to accept people just as they are. And may we continue to be that place for one another. Because that's what reflects you to the world. We love you, God. Amen.